All right, what's up everyone? The other day I did a post on Instagram saying that I don't believe stabilizer muscles are a real thing, and ended up being a little bit more controversial than I expected it to be. I mean, obviously I was trying to dish out a hot take, but I mean, I do hot takes pretty much on a daily basis on social media. But this one really popped off and there was a fair amount of negative response to it. So I thought I'd just do a full video. This video won't just be about whether or not stabilizer muscles are a thing, or if that is a way of categorizing muscles, and even if they were a thing, like how would that even influence our training decisions or the way we train different muscles, but just sort of unpacking the concept of stability a little bit more broadly, talking about all the different components of it as I understand them and as I teach other coaches about them, just so the conversation about stability as a concept can be actually helpful, because that's what I'm interested in. Not just talking about things that are true, but talking about what's useful about these concepts, and then the practical application or the practical takeaways from understanding these concepts properly or on a bit of a deeper level. And yeah, so I'm doing this video just sort of walking around getting some steps in, because I'm on day 3 of my cut. It's meant to be an aggressive cut, but then I'm also going out for burgers and beers tonight. So it's basically just been fasting all day, and I just want to get a ridiculous amount of steps in, so that trying to live the best of both worlds, do this extreme cut and get the job done quickly, but then still enjoy social events with my mates. So I hope you don't mind me getting my steps in while I make this video. I guess I can show you a little bit of the hood. That's my favorite chair to sit in and look over the ocean when I have my morning coffee sometimes. Shouldn't out this person's privacy. That is my dream house. And if you want to help me afford that house, check out the link for GPP level 1 down below. That is basically pretty much my entire training model, just broken down and delivered to you through a series of lectures, and you get ongoing lifetime support. So it's not just one of those courses where you're in there for a couple of weeks and then you don't get any more support from me. It's like one payment, you get lifetime access to me in a Discord where you can chat to me about the application of these concepts as much as you want. And then we also have 3 live calls a week where we just hop on and just have a chat as a community with all the GPP level 1 coaches. Anyway, let's get into the video. So what's the deal with stability? Before we talk about stability more broadly, as far as like the actual useful application of it, let's address this thing about stabilizer muscles. All right, so let me for a second just put myself in the shoes of a coach who believes that stabilizer muscles are a real thing. And you know, when we hear coaches talk about like, oh, don't forget to train your little stabilizer muscles, classic ones that they're talking about, I guess in the upper body, we've got rotator cuff, maybe trap 3 or the lower trap. Well, I don't know if they categorize that as a stabilizer, but like definitely the rotator cuff. I mean, the rotator cuff's a group of 4 muscles, but they're definitely categorized by certain coaches as stabilizer muscles for the shoulder. And the real classic one for the lower body, it's got to be the glute med. That's like king of the stabilizer muscles for people who believe in that crap. And then a lot of people in my comments section brought up deep hip rotators. So I guess like things like your piriformis and a couple of those other little deep muscles close to your butthole. I think like the most obvious thing that stands out to me is how much of these tiny little stabilizer muscles actually contributing to, I guess, the stability of our joints, or the overall stability. I prefer to call it coordination of a movement. How much do you think a glute med or a deep hip external rotator muscle like a piriformis is contributing to the overall stability of your hip socket or the hip joint, compared to like your glute max, compared to your adductors, compared to your hamstrings, compared to your rec fem, compared to all your hip flexors and things like that? My view of it is that all muscles contribute to stabilizing a joint, not just these tiny little weird categorization of small stabilizer muscles that some people decide to hyperfixate on, which leads to like a deeper conversation about like how is stability created in a joint? Because I think there's like 2 different categories. There's passive stability, which, you know, the passive structures of a joint, which provide a certain level of stability, but then your more active stability, which does come from your contractile tissues. Are you telling me that if you just tore your glute off the bone, that you wouldn't lose a lot of hip stability? If you tear your adductor or one of your hip flexors or your rectus femoris, like your joint, your hip joint will be tremendously unstable. Let's look at the upper body example. muscle. So again, when we're talking about stabilizer muscles in the upper body, a lot of people are just focused on the rotator cuff. But are you telling me if you tore your pec or you tore your lat, that your shoulder isn't going to be tremendously more unstable? And so once you sort of accept this idea that every single muscle, just not your tiny little stabilizer muscles, but all your big muscles as well, big muscles, small muscles, all working together to stabilize a joint. Oh, sorry, like I said, it's not even just that. We have passive structures, like for example, these ball and socket joints, because there's it's such a tight fit between the ball and then the socket of that joint. There's like this vacuum effect, so that's providing stability. So in my view, this idea of a specific category of stabilizer muscles, it just downplays or minimizes the role that your larger muscles contribute to the overall stability and coordination of a joint. And it also minimizes the role of just the passive structures and the massive role that they contribute to the overall stability of a joint. I mean, I think another good example of this is they've done studies in adult populations, like more than 50% of the adult population, I think it might even be as high as 70% of the adult population, have partial or full thickness rotator cuff tears. And I guarantee you, if you had a tear in your pec or a tear in your lat, that is going to do much worse things to your shoulder stability than a torn rotator cuff. Again, I'm not saying that the role of the rotator cuff isn't important for the overall function of the joint. The whole thing works together as a coordinated system. Pecs and lats do so much, and like the delt muscles do so much to stabilize a shoulder. Rotator cuff contributes as well, but again, you just got to look at things in the broader context, and you just can't like ignore things that are contributing to the stability and just have this like selective view of like, oh, I guess this muscle stabilizes, and then like, what are the other muscles doing then? So it is interesting. I think in some textbooks there are muscles that are categorized as stabilizer muscles, but I think it's
content, baby.
Hell yeah. I think another really important aspect of this to unpack is like the actual functions of a muscle. Like, what can a muscle do? All muscles do is contract and relax. There's no stabilizer function. Muscles just produce varying amounts of tension at varying degrees of length. We've got these different contraction types. So we've got eccentric contractions or lengthening under tension. You've got concentric contractions, which is shortening under to produce force and tension. And then you've got these like isometric contractions, which the muscle doesn't change length and just produces tension in that one same position. And so rather than describing the role of these muscles with a nebulous term like, oh, it's stabilizing, why don't you just describe the exact behavior of the muscle that you want to? So when you say stabilize, do you mean eccentrically contract? Eccentric contraction feels like such an oxymoron. Anyway, let's move on. We can unpack that another time. Are you describing a concentric action of the muscle, or are you describing an isometric contraction of the muscle? So a good example of this is, I think when people will talk about like when they see knees caving in on a squat, and we can talk about whether or not we think that's a problem in another video. If you follow my content, you probably already know how I feel about that. So a lot of these coaches who believe in stabilizer muscles, or that the glute med is a stabilizer muscle for the hip, and I guess sort of downstream the knee joint and maybe all the way down to the foot. And so when they see the knee cave in, they say that that's an unstable hip. So I guess if you want the knees to stay out, you're looking for like an isometric contraction of the glute med. It's not being a stabilizer muscle, it's isometrically contracting. And so if you're obsessed with this idea that a good squat technique involves keeping your knees out as you move through hip flexion and hip extension, again, it's ultimately what you're describing is coordination. So this is when we start to go down like the nocebo part of this conversation, where someone gets a little bit of knee cave, and rather than just saying like, oh, we just need to get more of an isometric contraction in your glute med, you're like, oh, your hip's unstable, then all of a sudden people think that there's something wrong with them, where it's like, really what you're just describing is a coordination issue. Or like I said, I don't even think knees coming in on a squat is an actual problem, but like in this hypothetical world where that's something that we might want, because the labels you put on things and the way you describe things, especially as a coach to clients, it can really shape their pain and injury experience, or just create all these negative expectations about their body, just being like, oh my God, you've got this unstable hip because your glute med's not stabilizing. Whereas discussing these things in terms of like skill and coordination, it's like, oh right, you're not as skilled as I want you to be in your squat, and we've got this particular joint action happening when we approach these heavier loads, and we just need to practice some things to improve your overall coordination or strength of particular muscles, so then that way you're expressing the squat form that I like. And then that way you're getting the job done and you're not scaring the shit out of your client unnecessarily. I mean, like, oh, your hip's unstable, like, that's hectic. It's just a coordination thing. But again, circling back to this bigger picture, it's not just this tiny little glute med that's stabilizing the entire hip joint. You've got so many passive structures contributing to the stability, and you've got so many massive muscles and small muscles that work in tandem to keep the head of that femur in the hip socket. So again, instead of using this vague language of like, oh, your stabilizers aren't working, just talk about the exact muscle that's not behaving the way you want it to, and don't make up some word that isn't actually part of its function, okay? No stabilizer function of the glute med. It can contract eccentrically, isometrically, or concentrically. So just say exactly what you think's going on rather than using this weird nebulous term. All right, and now in terms of useful conversations regarding stability, I think it's really, really good to understand the whole concept of internal stability versus external stability. So an example of internal stability would be, again, just talking about the coordination of all your muscles in tandem with the passive structures and the inherent stability that they provide to a joint. And then there's this whole concept of external stability. So a good example of that would be like machine-based exercises. They've just got these structures that you push different parts of your body in to stop them from moving, so that we can move other parts of our body more effectively or in a more isolated manner. And we sort of look at that as the use of external stability. One of the practical discussions we can have about this is when you are training your triceps, there are certain parts of your triceps that are trained better when your humerus is moving in conjunction with your elbow, but then there are other parts of your triceps that are going to be trained better when the humerus is in a fixed position and we've just got pure elbow flexion and extension without the humerus moving through flexion and extension itself at the shoulder joint. And so a lot of you have probably had this experience maybe when doing like a single arm tricep extension, especially if you're really trying to go heavier and do lower rep work. The internal stability demands of that, especially at the shoulder joint. So again, talking about stabilizing, we're trying to get all the muscles around the shoulder joint to contract isometrically, because that's going to hold the humerus in place while we train that elbow flexion and extension and work the triceps the way that we want. But sometimes we start to work with weights where we can't actually provide the requisite amount of internal stability ourselves, and you do start to get a little bit of humerus movement, and then we're getting a less effective tricep stimulus, or we're not getting the exact tricep stimulus that we're after. And so the ways we can address this, we can just train our shoulders and get them stronger over time. You can lower the weight so that you're reducing the internal stability demands, or what's really trendy these days is to use some form of external stability. So you'll see a lot of people, instead of standing facing the stack, they're standing facing away from the stack so they can push their humerus into the pole of the cable stack. And when you're just leaning your entire body weight with your humerus pressed into the cable stack, it's going to dramatically reduce the internal stability demands. All of a sudden we're using the world around us and external constraints to give us that stability. Back in the day, everyone used to get scared off machine training so much because people are like, oh, you're not training your little stabilizer muscles, you're just building non-functional muscle. Again, once you understand that all muscles contribute to the stability of a joint, and the bigger and stronger they are, especially the big muscles, the more stable that joint's going to be. And I assure you, your glute med is almost certainly working just as hard in a hack squat or a pendulum squat, which is externally stabilized, as it is during a regular squat. Because again, it's not just one muscle that switches off as soon as you have external stability. If anything, we can work our muscles harder when we have, and closer to failure, when we have this external stability to rely on. But just because these machines and these externally stabilized exercises supposedly help us train the target tissues more optimally, I would still say that there's a huge practical application to working on your internal stability, your coordination, and that is like sometimes you're just not going to have access to the machine you want. So if you're not really good at creating that internal stability yourself, then you're just not going to be able to train that body part or that muscle group that effectively. Or at a certain strength level, you're just going to be like full stacking the machine, and that's what's so good about about free weights. They're just so easy to load up on. Like, it's basically an infinite amount of load, practically speaking, for most people that you can put on a barbell or dumbbells for most people, unless you're crazy, ridiculously strong. And so this is where having that skill and coordination really pays off. Like, I think it's really important to get good at using a barbell, to get good at using dumbbells and things like that, because they're just so abundant. So when you don't have a good machine setup, or you don't have the external constraints required to fully stabilize a certain movement passively, like I said, you've just got the internal stability and the coordination to do it yourself. That was the other weird straw man that came up a lot in the comments section. People were like, oh, so you're saying I don't need to train my rotator cuff? Are you saying I don't need to train my glute med? I'm like, no, there's so many reasons to train those muscle groups, even when you don't believe that there's this made up category of stabilizer muscles. Like, having a strong rotator cuff is amazing, because then it can contribute to stability and coordination the same way your pecs and your shoulders and your lats can. I still train my glute med. I don't believe that my glute med's a stabilizer muscle. I still train it. Every single muscle in your body benefits from being bigger and stronger. This idea that you just train your rotator cuff because of like, oh, it's a stabilizer muscle, or you just train your glute med because like, oh, it's a stabilizer muscle. It's the most backwards, inconsistent application of logic. So yeah, next time someone's hassling you about these tiny little stabilizer muscles, just ask them, be like, oh, do you reckon like big muscles contribute to stability as well? Do you reckon pecs contribute to stability of the shoulder? Do you reckon the glute max contributes to the stability of the hip? And they'll probably just have this like blank stare, because I think a lot of people who speak confidently in this industry, they don't actually have principles, or they don't have like consistent applied logic to all these frameworks. And if you want someone who does have a truly principle driven model, go down in the notes, check out GPP Level 1. It's the best value education in the industry. I'll make you a way better coach. If you're not interested in that and you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe so you see the next video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.